and to foster an inclusive environment for a diverse workforce. I would like to thank Dr. Lambiasi for his support in this endeavor. Without further delay, it is my distinct honor to introduce Dr. Bonnie Miller as our Grand Round speaker today. Dr. Miller has been recognized as a senior leader in medical education and has guided Vanderbilt University School of Medicine through several cycles of curriculum innovation. Currently, Dr. Miller serves as Vice President for Educational Affairs at Vanderbilt University. In this role, she promotes innovative approaches to continuing professional development and serves as an advisor for medical education across the continuum. She also serves as a Senior Director for Academic Communications for the Kern National Network for Caring and Character in Medicine. Dr. Miller formerly served as Senior Associate Dean for Health Sciences Education at Vanderbilt and Executive Vice President for Educational Affairs at Vanderbilt University. In these roles, she oversaw all programs related to physician education. Dr. Miller received her medical degree at the University of Oklahoma and completed her postgraduate training in general surgery at Vanderbilt, followed by a fellowship in hepatobiliary disease at Virginia Mason Clinic in Seattle. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Miller.
And I've been told that it's okay to proceed without mask on, which will be a little bit easier, I think, for all of us. And I said, I think like all of you, I've been fortunate enough to be fully vaccinated. I'm very, very grateful for it. So anyway, thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. And I wanted to talk, I'm obviously talking a bit about leadership. This is going to be more general, not focused entirely on women in leadership positions, although I will definitely touch on some aspects, I think, of leadership that are more challenging for women. I think there are other parts of leadership that may come to women a little bit more naturally. But again, thank you for the opportunity to be here. And let's see. Okay, sorry. I have no financial conflicts of interest. And just a disclaimer, as a lot of you may know, the literature on leadership in general is just voluminous. And leadership in medicine is actually quite a large literature as well. And I want to say I am a generalist, truly, and not an expert in this field, but you heard a bit about my background. I actually grew up in Dover, Delaware, and I'm happy to, it's easy for me to say that now that people know where Delaware actually is. For a long time, I would say I was from Delaware, and people would ask me if that's in Pennsylvania and things like that. But Delaware is back on the map. I have been married for 44 years. My husband and I are both physicians. We got married right after our undergraduate education. He's a pulmonologist at Vanderbilt. We have 3 children, ages 28 to 37, which just boggles my mind. They can't be that old because how can that be? I trained, as you heard, as a general surgeon at Vanderbilt. I actually practiced full-time in the community for 12 years before coming back to the mothership. I was in administration for, in the dean's office for 20 years and really was sweeping change, not just with our curriculum, but also, some of you may know, there was a separation at the time between Vanderbilt University and Vanderbilt University Medical Center. And that was just a huge administrative change and probably gave me the largest leadership challenges that I've had. So you can see student affairs, curriculum, and then the senior associate dean until a year and a half ago. Right now, I'm focusing on special projects, a lot having to do with continuous professional development. And I'm happy to talk to anybody about that. We're using innovative technology for workplace, just-in-time micro-learning. So it's kind of fun. But I also am teaching a medical student leadership elective to 4th-year students, and a small group of 4th-year students have signed up for it. And what I'll be using are kind of very high level, almost survey of this 4-week course that we do. I'll be referencing some of the articles that I have the students read because I think they're important. And also, one of the things they do in this class is interview usually junior faculty members and sometimes chief residents to talk to them about leadership challenges they've already faced. And this course, as I tell them, it's not about a title. Leadership is not about a position. Leadership is stuff that you do every single day. So I say it's like leadership with a little L, not necessarily a capital L. So the objectives, again, leadership concepts that I think apply to medicine and healthcare, recognize some different styles of leadership that are employed in medicine. Some special challenges that women may face in leadership positions. And then again, across the board, I hope that people will be able to apply some of these to their own experience. So I think I use a framework. I think frameworks are important, the kind of hang concepts on. But there are different frameworks. I actually got this Master of Management and Healthcare degree several years ago at Owen School at Vanderbilt. And the person who taught the leadership course, he used a framework of leading yourself, leading teams, and leading organizations, which was really quite good. But I like thinking about it, at least for the purposes of the course that I teach. Leadership is about who you are, it's about what you do, it's about how you do it. And then importantly, it's like, how will you measure your success? How will you know you're successful? And so this is a frame I'm going to use for the talk. And so we'll start with knowing yourself. And I think we all know how challenging this can be. Sorry, it's kind of off the slide here. But it's hard to do any talk about leadership without referencing emotional intelligence. And this is Goleman's kind of framework for emotional intelligence. And I'm sure, is anybody familiar with this? Okay, a couple of people. That it's easy to remember. It's almost like a 2x2 grid. It's self and social, and it's then recognition and regulation. And so you're self-aware, you're aware of your social situation, you manage yourself and you manage relationships. So kind of thinking about the self first part of this framework, just calling out a few aspects of this. Self-awareness is, again, difficult. I think you can think about it in two kind of buckets. One is kind of knowing yourself in the long term. Like, what are your tendencies? What are your patterns of reaction to different kinds of situations? How do you react to different types of people? And so there's those kinds of things that really don't change over the long run. And so knowing those things about yourself. The other part of self-awareness is in the moment, is kind of like understanding how I'm reacting in this moment to this situation. And I say it's a bit metacognitive, but it's being above the situation, looking down on yourself, as well as being in the situation at the same time. So you kind of have to develop that ability to monitor, to calibrate where you are. And the self-control also is a kind of a calibration. I don't think it necessarily means hiding all of your emotional reactions to situations, because I think sometimes people need to know how you're feeling about different things that are happening. But it does involve a decision, deliberation, and calibration. So if I'm in a situation where I'm angry, and I think that it's actually helpful for the people on my team to know that I'm not happy, I won't necessarily hide that, but I will try to calibrate it so I'm not in control. And one of the people that I worked with, I think, was a master at this. I mean, it's just like, well, I would say he would reported to him for quite a while. And he could let you know he was not happy, but he was always in control of that. And I came to really respect that. I think sometimes it's not easy, and this is one place, and maybe it's just me, but sometimes I think for women, there is a tipping point, that I would allow myself to feel the emotion, let people know, but I could tip over to the point that I felt like I was no longer in control. And you have to be very, very careful about that. I think just, whether you're angry or hurt or whatever, I think trying to be careful across the board to calibrate and not tip over into that region where you're no longer in control. The self-confidence is, again, another area that I think can be kind of difficult for everyone, but I think especially for women, that we have a tendency, I think, to suffer more from the imposter syndrome. So sitting around the table with a group of other leaders or with a team, do you feel that you really belong there? And one of the things that was really nice when we were in senior leadership positions in the medical school, we were able to work with an executive coach. And he was present at different meetings when we would all be sitting around the table. And after about a year, I've been a year in the senior associate dean position, I met with him and he said, you're doing okay, he said, but you're lacking in executive presence. And I'm thinking, like, what in the heck is that? I'd never heard the term before, but basically it comes down to, like, you might say, leaning in, but the sense that you actually belong at the table and you act like you belong at the table. And I think that's just a lot of confidence. Sometimes you kind of have to fake it. And I was talking to my younger daughter about this once. And I said, I sometimes think, well, maybe I should be an actress when I'm just this nervous sitting around a table and I'm with all these people who, are going to be judging me. Like, maybe I can be an actress and act like the character in a play that I would like to be. And she said, well, Mom, that's just so disingenuous. Like, that's so inauthentic. And I said, well, it's just a device in a way. Sometimes I just think about how I would like to be and try to be that person. So I do think that this is a challenge, again, I think for everybody who's especially new in a position and a new team, to try and feel like you belong there. But if you've been invited to be there, then you belong there, and you just have to trust other people's judgment about letting you be there in the first place. Accurate self-assessment was one of the things on the emotional intelligence list here. And I've got this, it just doesn't show up very well, but this is Lake Wobegon. Does everybody remember A Prairie Home Companion? So, like, right, maybe the older people in the crowd, but this was Garrison Keillor that did the NPR show. Well, I asked medical students if they remember Lake Wobegon, and they don't know that Garrison Keillor is. Just bothers me. Anyway, but those of you who used to listen to Prairie Home Companion with Garrison Keillor know that he'd always tell these tales of Lake Wobegon. And this quote in the bottom, he said, Lake Wobegon was where all the women were strong, all the men were good looking, and all the children were above average. And I use this quote because we are really bad at self-assessment. And people generally, from anything like tying your shoes to driving a car, if you're asked, how would you rate yourself? People always kind of go to somewhere around the 75th percentile. Nobody wants to say they're the best in the world, and nobody wants to admit that they're below average. So doing an accurate self-assessment is one of the hardest things to do. In medical, at Vanderbilt, we actually instituted a little portfolio coaching program with our medical students so that they could learn the skills of accurate and evidence-based self-assessment. So it's always good to have some kind of performance data, and it's really good to have a coach to look at that with you to help you with the interpretation. But this is, research has been done in this area, and it's best, we say now, to have guided self-assessment if you can find somebody to help you with that. So coaching is good. Has anybody ever done a 360-degree evaluation? Yeah. And so 360s are wonderful also. So if 360 is getting feedback evaluation from everybody you work with, whether it's your boss, your patients, your students, everybody. You do the self-assessment at the same time. And it's very interesting to see the gap between your own assessment of your own weaknesses and strengths and what other people think about you. And so I would just say sometimes it's a little bit intimidating to be placed to say you're going to get this and you're afraid of what you're going to see. But if somebody offers you the opportunity to do a good 360, I will always say take it. It's just really very, very helpful. So some other questions. This comes from Peter Drucker, who was one of the, I think, kind of original people, writers and researchers in management. He started in the 1930s. It was kind of ahead of his time. This comes from something he wrote later in his career, Managing Oneself. And he had several questions that he thought people needed to ask in trying to understand themselves. Like, what are your strengths? How do you work best? What environments best suit you, and what can you contribute? What are the unique contributions that you can make? With your strengths, it's interesting to read this article. He says, go with your strengths. He said that people spend a lot of time trying to move from sort of mediocrity or out of mediocrity, and it's sometimes very, very difficult to do. When we read this article with medical students, they're a little puzzled because it goes against the grain of competency-based education, where you really need to hit a certain level in all of the different competency domains. So even if, say, communication skills is not necessarily one of your great strengths, you've got to make it a strength. You've got to get better. And I think that this is not completely incompatible with that. I think you need to have a level of competence in a variety of different areas. But to really excel, you're going to go with your strengths and do the things that you really love to do. And that's how you'll thrive. Same thing with thinking about how do you work best. Do you like having a very, very predictable schedule? Do you like knowing that I'm going to see, 10 patients today, and these are the things that they're going to have, and I'm going to be prepared, and this is there's always surprises. It's never completely predictable. Or do you really like kind of the emergency department, and you're not really sure what you're going to see, and kind of thrive on that kind of excitement? So knowing some basic things about how you work best. Same thing, environments, and thinking about kind of it's along with what are your strengths. Again, what are the unique things that you might be able to contribute to your workplace based on your interest, based on your strengths and all those things. So kind of going through an inventory and answering these questions, asking and answering them every so often, it can change with time. And one of the things that I think is wonderful about a career in medicine is that it really does give you the opportunity to kind of try different things at different points along the way. Just another, again, aspect of knowing yourself. So what leaders do, again, using Daniel Goleman and emotional intelligence, the other side of this grid, kind of this idea of a social awareness. So it's not just knowing yourself, but really being aware of the different kinds of situations you're in. And then relationship management, you see all of these wonderful things, inspiring and developing and so on. So I'm going to call out here organizational awareness. And medical centers, health centers and health systems are some of the most complex organizations that you will find. And especially teaching hospitals or teaching centers like Erlanger, like Vanderbilt, where you've got, your teaching mission, your clinical care. There's a business level that is so complex. And any research that's going on, there are different really kind of rewards and incentives in each one of those areas, different interests sometimes that compete with each other. And when you come to a new organization, if you can figure out as much about that as possible, especially for leaders, this is a critical skill. We talk again, ACGME, core competencies, systems-based thinking. or systems-based practice, systems thinking for a leader, I think, is absolutely critical. You just need to know where your little part of the organization fits into the larger structure. Who are the people in all of these little nodes that influence everything else, and especially influence what it is that you do? And so just kind of trying to figure that out and being aware of that, especially, when you're, say, again, at a table, how do all of these people kind of factor in? What do they represent? How do their interests maybe influence what I'm trying to do? It may sound sometimes a little bit calculating, but again, it's just so important to understand the very, very valid interests that other people in your organization have, and how can you align with that and make everybody successful. The service orientation was another thing that that Goleman calls out, and this is from Robert Greenleaf, The Servant as Leader, and I'm going to get this little monograph that you can order online from the Greenleaf Center, and he also wrote in the 1970s, so he's not, the most recent writer, but this absolutely resonates with me for leadership in medicine. He talks about being servant first. The servant leader starts through service. And because of the quality of the service that person provides to others, to the organization, they become a leader. But this idea of servant first, someone who wants to serve as opposed to just wanting power, influence, fame, or wealth. So again, this is something that the medical students read. It looks longer than it is. It's actually a series of very, very short essays. And I think it's, again, this is, when we talk about a leadership philosophy, for me, this is the one that really has resonated best. Going to the list of what Goleman said leaders do: inspire, develop, influence, change, manage conflict, connect, make connections, again, between your parts of the organization and others, and between lots of different people, and then empower teams. I got into this kind of discussion with some people in a national committee once about, and this is like back in 2005, so it's been quite a while, but thinking about leadership in medical education, and can you be a leader and not manage change and not be leading change? And we kind of got into an interesting argument about that it's not all organizations are always changing. And so, change is not a kind of prerequisite for leadership. But the more I've thought about this, the more I think that leaders don't lead things to stand still. And just given the fact that our environments and are changing all of the time, especially within healthcare and within medical education, I think that change management is probably one of the most important things that leaders do. Of course, managing conflict is something that comes with the job. I don't know anybody who particularly enjoys that, but it's probably good to develop some skill there. A lot of people really do try to differentiate sort of leadership from management and say, the manager is the one that keeps the budgets and the accounting and, kind of like makes things happen, in charge of operations. And the leaders are the ones that have the vision and the inspiration and get people on board and all of that. And I think that's more or less true, especially when it comes to change management. But I will tell you that leaders also have to know some basics about management. And one of the reasons I went back and got this management degree is because kind of looking at my own strengths and weaknesses, I knew that there were some things I was not very good at. And I didn't think I was really very good at things like budgets and balance sheets and income statements. And I didn't know there was a difference between cash flow and revenue and all of this. And And so it was one of the better things that I did, as even though I'm not, say, the business officer in my organization and I'm not the one keeping the books, I need to understand what they do. So I think that kind of hard distinction between leadership and management is probably a bit of an oversimplification. You really need to develop some critical management skills as well. And then this other thing, risk taking. Leaders end up eventually needing to take some risk. And especially if you think about change management, you're going from something that people know, something that's familiar, to something that they don't know, and something that can come with uncertainty and can come with a little bit of risk and threat. And it's always good to, kind of be aware of what the risks are. And we all think about risk mitigation. And yeah, there's a risk that if I go in this one direction, this bad thing is going to happen. But how can I cushion that? How can I mitigate the impact if it actually does happen? But I think that it's difficult to be in a leadership position and feel like it's completely risk-free. Now, doctors are actually not good at risk. And if you kind of think about it, that we go to college and we do really, really well, we go to medical school, and as long as you do relatively well, you're going to graduate, you're going to match into a residency, and you're going to get a job. And I was saying I have these three grown children that I talked about. None of them went into medicine. One is in actually healthcare business. One is in public health and working right now for the state of Connecticut. And one is in science communications. And the difficulty and the challenge they had kind of in trying to find their first jobs out of school was very, very different than I think what we encounter in medicine. So just saying that we have, a path when we go into medicine and make that decision, we have a pathway in front of us. And a lot of times it's kind of risk averse. So just kind of to think about that. So how leaders lead. Also in this Goldman article, and there's lots of articles that he's written about emotional intelligence. I'm referencing this one because it's the one that our students read. And he's done a lot of research, kind of observing and interviewing many, many leaders across the world even, and has been able to come up with these 6 different leadership styles that involve different kinds of emotional intelligence and actually create different climates in your workplace. And that's the other thing that a leader does, is set a culture and establish a climate for your workplace. And each one of these styles kind of creates a different kind of a climate. Without going into too much detail, and I do recommend this paper, the coercive is something that you use when you need to make a change in sort of an urgent crisis situation right away. And it's basically, you're going to do what I tell you to do. You're not going to ask questions. This is going to be the way it is. The research shows that that's not good for climate in the long term, that people do not feel empowered. They feel demoralized when there's always somebody telling them what to do. And in general, this is not something that we would recommend on a long-term basis. Now, I know that surgeons may have kind of a bad reputation as being coercive type leaders. It doesn't, especially I would say as a woman in the operating room, it doesn't get you very far. Authoritative is different than authoritarian. And so I think we think a lot about like authoritarian again being maybe more coercive, but the authoritative leader actually is inspirational and does have a vision and tries to bring people along with that vision. And so your performance, your actions, the things that your team does are all headed towards that mission. And the leader here is the keeper of the vision. There are guardrails, and that's something I think is really important, when you're working with teams, and especially talented teams like we work with. People want to feel like they've got some freedom and some empowerment to make decisions, but you do have to set the guardrails that keep you on that pathway towards the vision. Affiliative, I think, comes more naturally. It comes more naturally to me as a woman. I believe in building relationships, and this is all about relationship and people, and really trying to give people as much freedom and flexibility as they can. It's very positive, it's very reinforcing. And the problem with this is sometimes if performance is not great, you've already built this relationship, and sometimes it's hard to backtrack and be more, say, authoritative and sometimes coercive. Democratic is great when you've got a team that's all really kind of again, understands the mission. And also if you as a leader are not sure about the right thing to do and really need to gather perspectives around the table, it can immobilize you. If you're always waiting for a vote on something and you can't get agreement or consensus, it can really stall progress. And then pace setting is something I think we're familiar with. This is the leader who is the best and the expert at everything he does and works harder, works 80 or 90 hours a week, and doesn't necessarily expect everybody else to do that, but by setting that expectation, people feel like they need to meet that, and it can also be demoralizing. And then coaching, again, a kind of more of a positive that's, kind of build you up. So again, very, very high level. Goldman says, try to stay away from coercive and pace setting as much as possible because of the negative impact on climate. But most leaders are going to have to use these different styles for different situations, even though you may more naturally fall into one or another. On the other hand, another great article by Bill George, Authentic Leadership, and he makes the case that actually there isn't a formula for a good leader, and that you really need to lead from your own life experience. So this is almost kind of going back to self-awareness. You need to know your own history very, very well, how you got where you ended up, and kind of lead from that place. Just to try to illustrate this, because it's like a little hard to understand, is like you can't lead just automatically by being yourself. But I think I mentioned that one of the exercises in our leadership class is to interview people about their leadership challenges. So one of the students last year interviewed one of our chief residents in Madison, a really great guy, and he told her a story about becoming a chief and how difficult that was for him. He had followed somebody who was kind of he said, kind of distributing candy on rounds kind of guy. And, very upbeat and, but pushing people along. But he felt that the residents who were struggling, or maybe who were a bit stressed or a bit burnt out in that environment, didn't really feel comfortable coming forward and asking for help, because everything was always just so upbeat and positive that they felt like if there was a problem, it would disappoint the chief. And he's the kind of thought there were a series of chiefs that kind of learned from one another, and that was kind of their approach to leadership. He had struggled quite a bit in his development. He was a bit older. He actually came from Mexico, and he had a wife and a couple of children. And he ended up in a couple of prestigious programs in college and medical school in the Northeast. And almost ruined his family and his marriage, and he had to kind of stand back and again, know himself and orient himself towards his values. And he felt that he needed to be able to share that and to lead authentically from his experience if he was going to be the kind of leader he felt he needed to be, and if he was going to address the kinds of problems he thought residents were having. And he talked to some of the program faculty about this, saying, you know, if I'm going to be a chief resident, I can't do it like these other guys have been doing it. I have to be myself, and I have to lead from this other place. And initially, some of the faculty said, oh, you can't do that. You know, you can't disclose. The self-disclosure is a bad thing. You can't show weaknesses. You can't let yourself be vulnerable. And he struggled, and he almost turned down the chief residency until he got kind of some support from a couple of other people, and importantly from the chair of the Department of Medicine, who said, you know, you're going to be good. You need to do it your way. And he ended up being spectacular, and I think probably changed the approach to being a chief at Vanderbilt as a result of that. So just to say that, you know, there's lots of different advice you can get about styles, and but ultimately there is this part that you have to be true to yourself in order to do the very best job. And then finally, thinking this big, what will you measure? And it's kind of like, how will you know you've been successful or you are being successful at different points along the way? And for this, I recommend this book, How Will You Measure Your Life? Clay Christensen was a faculty member at Harvard Business School. And I was really, really fortunate to be able to hear him speak on several occasions. This is a little bit tangential, but I just want to mention, if anybody is really seriously interested in becoming a leader in health professions education, the Harvard Macy Institute, has anybody heard of this? Is outstanding. They offer courses for people who are on that kind of career path, developing as a medical educator. They've got one just on the basics of health professions education, and another course on leading innovation and change. And these are, you know, they used to be on site at Harvard, and you apply for them, and it's not too difficult to get in. It's good to have your organization sponsor you. They're not cheap, but they're incredibly good courses. So Clay Christensen co-taught the one on leading innovation in health professions and health professions education. And I actually took that course once as a student and came back as an instructor a couple of times, partly because it was so much fun to hear him speak. He's a big, tall guy from the upper Midwest. I kind of had that upper Midwest draw or accent. It was just a wonderful, wonderful storyteller. And incredibly successful. He tells a lot of stories in this book, and there's a shorter paper about his own career development, the decisions he made. He and a couple of other people whose articles I've mentioned already started out in pretty high-level business jobs and decided that it wasn't for them, and that they kind of took this risk and thought about, in the end, you know, kind of trying to reject 20 or 30 or 40 years down the road, when I look back on my life, what are the things that will have been most important to me? And he gave a talk to one of the graduating business classes at Harvard Business School. And that was really the gist of it. As you're graduating, as you're starting out, take the time to imagine yourself, project yourself, and think about what are the handful of things that are going to be most important to you. He says that in his Harvard Business School class, one of the people who he became close with was one of the leaders at Enron. And he says he knows that when his friend from Enron graduated from Harvard, he said he didn't set out saying, I'm going to create the biggest business fraud in history. He didn't do that. But because he hadn't really, he thinks, done this work of figuring out where you want to go, what you want to measure, and how do you stay on that path as you're making decisions day by day by day, that's how you kind of have a tendency to sort of fall off of that path. And just kind of thinking about all of this, and I know early on when my husband and I were starting out and thinking about, two busy doctors, a surgeon, a critical care pulmonologist. He did a lot more critical care back then. 3 kids. How are we going to make this all work? And we said, okay, this is, we're going to maybe not work quite as hard as, say, people who weren't in this situation. And this is like in the 1980s. So like 35 years ago, before it was as common to have sort of the double doctor couples. And so you make that one decision, but what became very apparent to me is that it's actually not just that one decision, but it's that one decision that guides all the little decisions you make every single day. And I would say that I've got a child who has a soccer match, that afternoon. And then I get a call from a good referring doctor who says, I've got this patient in the ED who has, I think, appendicitis. And you're stuck in this, okay, I've made this commitment to my children, but this is a good referring doctor. And if I say I'm not available, maybe this doctor will never call me back again. And so it's those decisions that you have to make every single day in keeping true to the big decision that you make. And whether, again, you're a leader with a big L or a leader with a little l, these decisions come up all the time. And so I think it's an important thing, kind of an important exercise to go through. Like, what are those things that are going to guide you along the way? So another way of saying, what is your North Star? I'm a quilter. I could never do this. This is called a mariner's compass. It is probably the hardest quilt to make. You can see all of the detail. But I think it's like you create this beautiful North Star, right? Like, my North Star is my family and my career. I want to try and balance that and make it all work and make it all look just beautiful together. But it's not easy to do. Like making all of those pieces fit just perfectly, so that you kind of continue to follow that North Star. It takes artistry in some ways to make it come out that nicely. How will you be rewarded? Again, in medicine, I think especially in all of the different varieties of academic medicine or leadership in healthcare organizations, you think, we have a tendency to think about, what are, our CVs and the articles that get published and the grants that we get, and, our salary or the awards that we get. Well, what is it that will, again, when you look back and, you're kind of more at the end of the career, what are the things that really you'll find has rewarded you the most? And one of the things that a lot of the articles I've mentioned have in common is this: the leader in the end gets the greatest reward from the people that person develops. And this comes across loud and clear in servant leadership, in the Drucker article, in the Clay Christensen article, that when you think back on what the impact you had, being able to grow and develop other people and see them flourish, especially I think as a medical educator, is one of the most amazing things. And I think I didn't realize that until maybe halfway through, and you start seeing people that are doing well and they're growing. And some of them say, my graduates, my students would come back to be on faculty at Vanderbilt, and nothing made me more proud than that. And so kind of thinking that as you're going along, how can you how can you be aware of that? And I wanted just to read one quick quote from The Servant as Leader. And so what is a test of being a good servant leader? And he says it's the care taken by the servant first to make sure that other people's highest priority needs are being served. The best test, and difficult to administer, is, do those served grow as persons? Do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to become servants? And what is the effect on the least privileged in society? Will they benefit, or at least will they not be further deprived? And so again, I think as a model for what we do in medicine, regardless of what we do with our careers, it is a career that inherently is based on service. And I think when you get people to kind of reconnect with that message, there's more of a tendency to thrive. So you thrive when others thrive. And just want to say that, keep that in mind. The other thing that's very consistent across all of these articles is the need to be humble, and humility and curiosity. And Clay Christensen says that humility in a leader is not like being self-deprecating. It's like humility is not self-hatred. It's not what it is. But it's really thinking that everybody has something to teach you, and everybody has something interesting to talk about, and recognizing that in other people. As a leader, you learn so much that way. Back to risk taking, you're going to confront this in career development. And just to say that I had when I crossed over from being in community practice to coming back to Vanderbilt in 1999, felt like I was jumping off a cliff. I was fortunate I had a safety net, that, a husband that was working, and I could afford to take a bit of a risk. But it really felt like, what am I doing? And people would say, like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? But it just seemed like, again, kind of asking those questions. What can I contribute? Where do I function best? Where does a place seem to match my values? The values of the organization match my own values. Where will I be happiest? And kind of going with this, it led me to choose one path versus the other. You will never feel like you're fully prepared for the next step. I mean, to say that if you feel like you're absolutely prepared for the next job that you're going to take, it means that you're probably not stretching yourself enough. I would say be confident again in your inherent capabilities and the training that you've had. You want to be stretched. I see Dr. Shack back there. Did you feel like you were absolutely prepared to be dean? No. No. And so it's just, that's a bit of the risk taking, but it's also truly the challenge and the fun of it is to kind of allow yourself to grow and develop as well. And then finally, persevere. Life is not linear. I think most people understand that. It's not lockstep. There are good days and bad days. You go forward, hopefully 5 steps and back 1 or 2. And sometimes you take a blind path and it doesn't lead exactly where you thought it was going to go. That's a little bit of the risk taking as well. But generally, you're going to find your way back and you're going to end up where you want to be. But you just can't kind of go into it thinking that every day is going to get me a step further on that line. I like, the quote that I think is often attributed to Martin Luther King, that the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. I say, yes, the arc of history is long and it bends towards justice, but it is not linear or lockstep either. And we know, that there are kind of, it's wide because it allows for some wandering along the way. So kind of, again, think about it. time to do it right now, to kind of think about a personal mission, vision, and values statement. It's a good exercise to do. We do have our medical students do something like this in one of their learning communities classes, where they kind of write out this can change a bit over time, your mission for sure, your vision, your values are probably going to be more permanent. And just kind of, again, think about what that North Star is for you. And sorry about that. This is kind of cut off here. But once you know those things, you want to work in settings and with people who share your principles, your most important values. You want to know your organization's mission statement. Everybody's going to have a mission statement, and it's all going to sound great. I mean, nobody's going to write a mission statement again saying we're trying to head towards the bottom. Nobody does that. But you want to try to get a sense of how that works in lived experience of the people who are already there. Sometimes we find ourselves in settings that we, just didn't turn out to be what we thought. But as much as you can figure that out ahead of time, this is how you thrive. This is, again, not every day is great, but when you're in that place where the mission, the vision, the principles, the way people, believe what they believe is most important, when you share more or less most of them, that's where you're going to thrive. So kind of leave you with that final message. And I'm then happy to take any questions. If we have a minute, it's 9:01, I don't know. So thank you.
Anybody have any questions?
Hey, I was going to say, thank you so much for coming and speaking.
I'm very, very hard of hearing. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I'll speak a little louder. Thank you so much for coming today and speaking with us. As a resident, what are some concrete skills that we can learn during residency to foster our grit and leadership skills in order to prepare us for a career in education?
Right. So the question is, as a resident, what are some concrete things? I think as far as education goes, I think there are teaching skills that you can learn, and there are different resources available for that. And I would can make some of, I'm sure UT has some resources available. For leadership, I think as a resident, you're already dealing, I think, with a lot of competing interests. You get yourself kind of caught in time crunches sometimes, right, where there's a teaching conference, but also a patient that needs you, or you need to be home for something. I think, again, already now sort of figuring out what your values, your principles, your priorities are is really important. I think understanding the dynamics of a team and understanding the other people on your team and the people that you work with is something that you can start working on now. The more you can understand what may be going on with different people and with different competing interests, the better you're going to be able to sort of negotiate that and manage that. So in that sort of being in it and above it at the same time is to develop some of those metacognitive skills so that you're a player in the play, but you're a spectator simultaneously, so that you can kind of get that bigger picture. I do think that the self-regulation is part of that as well, and understanding how you're being aware of how you're feeling at any moment in time and trying to manage and control that is absolutely something that you can do as a resident. I would say, again, for teaching, work on your teaching skills now. You're teaching other residents, you're teaching medical students, you're teaching patients, and try to take that on as a deliberate practice that you get feedback on from the people you're teaching and use that feedback to improve. So, okay.
Thank you.
I just have a comment that I found your presentation exciting and inspiring. I don't really have a question, but I just want to say thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'll just say one thing as the dean. Before you can teach something, you've got to know it. So to answer your question, as a resident, learn all you can learn. You be available every time there's an opportunity to learn. You can't teach something to somebody else if you don't know it yourself. So that's it. You gotta know it. You gotta own it. Okay? Bonnie, great to see you. I want to come down and
Hey, I'm Lou. Hi, how are you? Thanks, I want to vaccinate. You know, the data's pretty good. Also.
I know,
But,
it's funny, I feel like I should just be able to take off and do it.
Yeah, me too. Thanks so much for coming. I appreciate it. It's kind of a weird thing. There were probably equally as many.
normally
people.
this room is full.
Yeah, they were all probably on Zoom or whatever
Yeah.
watching. So I appreciate it, but it was really, really cool. You know, it's funny. One of the biggest challenges that I found, and I think when I watch doctors and leadership, is actually interacting with non-physicians
Yeah.
and just trying to understand how they don't get it, and also being sympathetic because, as you said, we have skills we can fall back on.
That's right.
These poor people, they don't have the guarantees we do.
No,